try to kill him first. That was the way it was. Same thing with the Germans. Hello, you still there? Hello, our connection got broken, huh? Hello? 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 Hello?
Okay, so it appears we had a little bit of a technical difficulty. I hope everyone didn't run away there for the moment. Captain Vantine, are you back on the line?
Yeah, yes, I'm back. Sorry about that.
Okay, good. Yes. Well, good. I'm glad to hear that everyone is back on the line again. So I'm curious, Captain Vantine, from the time that you when you were at New Guinea, did you get to interact with any of the people there?
Well, I did quite a bit with the Australians, and I was very favorably impressed with them. They reminded me of Texans. They had broad brim hats, and they were kind of just like the typical Texan you would expect to be, and they were hardworking and they had been in this hot jungle, humid setup for quite a while, and they were, for one thing, Adabrin was what we were taking to avoid catching malaria because quinine was not available, and from taking that, where you perspire a lot, you turn yellow. So the Australians were all yellow under their arms where they perspired after taking Adabrin. And it was
interesting.
Quite unique. And they had when we finally went to the dock in Milne Bay to discharge our general cargo from the 'tween decks, they had trained some natives, some nearby islands called Goodenough Islands, to work as stevedores. And they were called Fuzzy Wuzzies because the top of their head was covered with very heavy hair. And they were, they all looked like came from the same cookie cutter. They were dark black, not an ounce of fat on them. They were all kind of short, about 5.5 feet tall, and they had great posture and a very graceful stride. And they wore only loincloths and were barefooted. And well, what really surprised me, I was down in the cargo hold watching some valuable cargo, and one of these Fuzzy Wuzzies had picked up an old Life magazine that the stevedores in New Orleans had apparently left in a picture of the New York skyline. And he asked me in perfect King's English with a cultured accent, was this picture true? And he told me that he was a child of England, that he'd been educated, taught English in an English missionary school. And hearing that, that the cultured British accent coming from that Fuzzy Wuzzy wearing a loincloth was a shocking experience, to say the least.
I bet. That's interesting. You know, there's another little thing that you said in your when you were in New Guinea. One of the things that I thought was kind of interesting, it was during your afternoon coffee break time, you would go swimming, but you always had to watch out for like stinging jellyfish, and there were huge swimming coral snakes that were about 8 feet long. And it was interesting to me that even though the Navy lieutenant had ordered you not to go swimming, you waited until he took a nap, and then a bunch of the boys went swimming. I just thought that. I mean, I could just envision this, happening.
There was an unusual officer in charge. He was what was in those days called derived with derision, the 90-day wonder, and he was a nice guy. He was a school teacher from Kansas that got into the Navy and was in charge of our Navy gun crew. But man, he did a very poor job. He slept about 12 hours a day, and he never inspected the guns. And we only had, on that long voyage from Panama to New Guinea, we only had one gunnery practice, and that I think that the ship's captain kind of insisted we should have at least one, where we dropped a barrel over the side and tried to hit it with cannon fire. But this gunnery officer was a complete loss. But anyway, he instructed his men not to go swimming, but he didn't have any authority over the Navy, the Merchant Marine crew, which I was in.
See.
So the Merchant Marine all went swimming, and he took a long nap every afternoon. So the Navy boys went swimming too. But we did have to watch out for those stinging stingrays that drifted by every once in a while. And one of the Navy boys shot one of these big snakes, and I was deck cadet on the ship. The chief mate and I, we had a lifeboat tied up at the foot of the gangway, so the chief mate and I decided to get that snake that he'd shot. It was a big one. It was about 8 feet long, and diameter in the middle was about 6 feet or so. 6 inches or so. It was a real big snake, and it was real heavy. I was draping it over the bow of the boat. Turned out it wasn't really dead. It started squirming around, so I pushed it back in the water, and it swam away. So these things were, I guess they were poisonous. They were coral snakes, so I think they're very poisonous. But we were scared of them, of course.
Mhm. One of the things that I really enjoy about your book, Captain Vantine, is although there is a lot of history and there is a lot of serious, important moments that are, your book is about, a lot of your career and the voyages that you took. But in between all of that, you really were great about bringing in all the little side stories. Like one of the ones that I liked about the cadet who drank a whole case of warm Coca-Cola. And you have all these, like the story about the swimming with the boys, and there's a story in there about, having a cold beer and the movie day. And you put all these little interesting stories. And for me, it's very picturesque of the time period that you were in and the adventures that you had and all the little side adventures that you had in addition to, as you're working, through your career and moving up in the world. So I really appreciate that aspect of your book. And I'm sharing that with listeners because a lot of times when we get a book and you think, oh, it's going to be, just filled with too much history and it would get boring. One of the great features about your book is that you added real life experiences of you as a boy and growing through all these experiences and even some very intimate details of some of the things that you witnessed that really wasn't part of your life at sea, but yet you had to go through some of these experiences regardless, and often they were with other people. So I just wanted to compliment you on that. That's one of the things that I really enjoy. It's history, which I love, but at the same time, it's really true to life experiences that you share with us, and you're very open about them and very candid, and I appreciate that as much. So I don't want to run out of time. We only have maybe a quarter of an hour left, so I do want to get to Voyage 1 and 2, so we're going to kind of split the time up that we have left of giving a little bit more detail on, tell us about your first voyage.
You mean while I was still a cadet?
No, this is after you've graduated.
Well, my first voyage, that would have been in April of, after I graduated, it would have been April, I believe it was, of 1945. And I was assigned as third mate on a Liberty ship in New York. Christopher Gadsden was the name of the ship, and we took a full load of Lend-Lease cargo, and it was bound for Liverpool, England. And while I had been home after graduating, and before I was assigned to that ship, Germany surrendered. So this was going to be the first voyage where we didn't have to worry about the submarines, assuming that the sub commanders got the orders to cease the combat. And so for the first time, we didn't have to worry about submarines. And the other big problem was mines, and they were mostly in the North Sea and along the European coast. Going to Liverpool, we would avoid those too. So this was a relatively safe voyage. The captain of that ship had been torpedoed twice, and it had really affected him. While we were at sea, he never undressed, and he slept on the settee in the chart room. It was as though he expected to be torpedoed again at any moment, although the submarines weren't supposed to be torpedoing us anymore. But I mean, that's an example of how the warfare at sea affected the people going to sea.
Because he had already experienced this twice, he was
right.
He was already he was on guard all the time. Yeah.
Right, and yeah. Of course, being torpedoed is quite a traumatic experience. I mean, your ship is sinking, and you have to launch a lifeboat, hopefully, and hopefully it can be done. And the weather may be so bad you can't do that, or it may be dark. You have to do it in the dark. So it can be quite a traumatic experience being torpedoed and sunk at sea. And of course, you have to survive the explosion of the torpedo, and it fired. Usually, a fire develops afterwards, so it's quite a traumatic experience. And that happened to him twice, and it really affected his psyche. I hope by the next voyage he was over it, but I only made that one voyage with him.
Mhm. Okay.
And we went to Liverpool, England, and they had been heavily bombed by the Germans, and there was still bomb damage available everywhere. And it was a kind of a dismal place because they heated and cooked with coal, and so every place in town had a coating of coal dust. But they needed a heavy rain to clean the place up. But the morale of the people was great, and they really appreciated the Merchant Marine, their own merchant service they called it, and our Merchant Marine, because the Germans were sinking so many ships that they almost starved England out, and it took our Merchant Marine, as I mentioned earlier, had a tremendous loss, but the British Merchant Marine was probably twice as heavy. They really suffered through a great deal of hardship, and the people in Liverpool were largely of Irish descent, and they were all very friendly, and they couldn't have been. They were on short rations, but I met a young lady there, and then she invited me to their home, and they wanted to give me a meal, but their rations were so